Okay, so we are here with John Petersen. Just conversations about everything and nothing and everything in between. Um, as a lot of you know, I've been canvassing the community in Aurora, and I had a chance to have a long conversation with John Petersen, and he just seems like a really interesting person with lots of different opinions. So I figured it would be important for the masses hear what he has to say about all kinds of things. We can take the direction of the conversation anywhere. But there's one thing, John, that we're gonna go into like your background a little bit and like what it was like for you up until now.
Okay.
But then also, there's one question that I always ask everyone. First of all, I just want to thank you for doing this. I appreciate it. It takes a lot of courage and guts to, be out front. Um, but there's one question I ask everyone before we get into the nitty gritty. Is actually this is part of the nitty gritty, but give us a time when, because I think everyone can relate to this in terms of adversity. Like when has there been a time when you've faced some real adversity in your life, and how did you face that? What did you learn from it? And did you experience any growth in that? And yeah, just give us like an anecdote of an experience you've had when you faced adversity and what the outcomes were.
That's an odd question. I'd say the greatest adversity I've had to face is probably myself.
Yourself.
Yes. My own personal weaknesses, things of that nature. I think it's been my own personal experience that, without being too specific, that I've found that everything I'm right about, I'm also wrong about. Or rather, what I have are incomplete answers. Even things I think I've figured out, there's still pieces I'm missing. And as a result, when it comes to self-improvement or my own failings, I'd have to say the greatest adversity has been digging through myself and forcing myself to recognize the areas that I am very wrong or broken, things that need fixing. That's probably been the hardest. I'm still doing it, but I'd say that's probably the hardest thing. The fact is that the challenges that are in life are actually a little more friendly than facing yourself.
Mm. Yeah, I've often noticed that about myself, that often myself gets in the way too. Like personal traits of my, or not traits, but my personality type is that I can get frustrated pretty easily, and my body language, and just like oftentimes what society wants from me, I don't kind of fit the mold that they're looking for. And so it's kind of been a struggle just trying to navigate those waters. But like in many instances, there are many things about me that I should feel lucky about too. That I mean, people would say that you're a white man, so you automatically have like an advantage over others, especially when it comes to the law, stuff like that. But at the end of the day, we still have to deal with ourselves, right? Like every action or decision we make clearly comes down to yourself, right? So I think a lot of people probably resonate with what you say about that, and I think it's easier for some people than others, but I can definitely relate to what you're talking about. But I also think that like struggling actually is something that helps us grow.
We're made to struggle.
Yeah.
There is, we don't exist without it. In my experience, one of two things happens: either you struggle, or you get weaker until you struggle.
Hmm. So it's part of evolution and
Yeah.
kind of like survival of the fittest. Like who can?
If you can struggle at the gym or on the stairwell, it's up to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you will struggle. You can just choose where, and often when. And if you do so intelligently, you can do it on your terms.
Yeah. I've been practicing meditation a lot lately, or just even just sitting in silence and being learning to be comfortable with my thoughts and just learning to be comfortable with who I am as a person or just being. And when I'm in silence, I often feel like it's a situation where I come to the realization that kind of nothing really matters, but everything matters at the same time, and that things just kind of slow down, and it all has to do with a mindset. And like for me, I've been trying to practice like equanimity, like calmness in chaos, and that's something that you achieve through meditation if you do it properly. It's like right before you reach total enlightenment is equanimity. But the tranquility that comes with equanimity, you're supposed to kind of even transcend that to the point where you're not even supposed to feel the euphoria of that. You're just supposed to let it be. But anyway, I'm going on a tangent here. And but like, how do you cope with your struggles? Like, how do you go? Like, for me, it's meditation. A lot of people would say, like, I make sure that I eat right, get a good night's sleep, blah blah.
Mm.
Like, I would assume that religion, because you said that you go to church a lot, and you're
Yeah.
a devout Christian.
Yes, I do believe that Christ is my Savior, definitely. And I am religious, yes. I was born and raised in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, also more commonly known as Mormon. But that name was actually never the church's name. It was more of a derogatory term given by those who liked mobbing us. So we just went with it.
Huh. So, were you born in Colorado?
No, California, actually. I moved here when I was 9.
Huh. Do you remember much about California?
I remember the surrounding area. I remember I liked riding my bike.
Yeah. Well, that's good.
You mentioned struggles before. I think one thing I had a lot of trouble with was selling life insurance. It's awful. I was no good at it.
I would think that someone like you would be really good at it because you're such an extrovert.
They thought that too. I'm not a
What
good
was it?
salesperson.
What was it about? What was it about? Like, what made you a weak salesperson? Do you think?
Well, part of it I think was random odds that didn't work in my favor. We were supposed to create a full schedule of appointments that we were supposed to go to. And I was telling a supervisor, I was like, look, line up a whole schedule full of people, whole week, and I get nothing but no-shows. They're not there. And he's like, that's not possible. I was like, it keeps happening, like every week. And he's like, that isn't possible. So he sat with me while I was on the phone setting up all my appointments for the week, and then he went with me for 2 days, and every single one was a no-show. And by the end of it, he was just fuming. He couldn't understand how it was even remotely statistically possible that this would occur. And I'm like, dude, I'm telling you, this is what's been going on for weeks, and I don't know why. So
a lot of it had to do with luck, and
or lack thereof.
Hmm.
But another part of it was at one point trying to sell life insurance sometimes to people that you know can't afford it. It's just a horrible feeling, because here you awaken them to the need of it in their life, and then you're not able to help them with that need. It's a horrible thing, and I hated doing it.
Yeah, it seems as though much of our society is based around profiting off of through like manipulation or exploitation and just like
Not necessarily.
okay.
I would say every job, every occupation a person can have, you make money by solving problems. That's it. And where sales are concerned, half the battle is getting them to perceive the problem so that you can solve it. But like, name a job that you get paid and you don't solve problems.
Mm, yeah, I don't think I can.
I used to think that politicians didn't solve problems and still got paid, but then I realized that they were solving problems, just not the problems of the people they're voting for, or should I say that are voting for them. So, let's say someone pays them to push forward some legislation or gives campaign contributions to push forward some legislation. They're solving someone's problem and they get compensated in turn. So I was wrong. Politicians are still bound by that same rule. I think I'd call it a law because I can't find an exception. I can't find an exception to it. People who get paid only get paid
Okay.
by solving problems.
So you feel like the reason politicians are able to solve problems or choose to solve the problems is because of the money factor?
No,
Primarily?
I'm saying that there are no paid occupations that don't solve problems. At the end of the day, we are
Okay.
compensated for solving problems.
Mm.
Now, let's
But
say
do you think that could be kind of a problem that the incentive to solve the problem is based on money primarily, and money often causes corruption? It can cause, or do you feel like money is a form of energy and it's kind of like
money is just a form of recognized value, and we trade with it. That's all. It's not inherently good or evil. You can do bad things with it. You can do good things with it, and I think it depends greatly upon the person. You could be ridiculously wealthy and do good things with money, and then you could do some horrific things as well. I think what money represents isn't just a recognized form of value. When you have a lot of it, it represents your ability to create a reality you want. And I think that inside a lot of us, there are less than savory parts. And as a result, you get your average person who claims to be moral, and then they get enough power and influence to create something that is more what they want, and suddenly they're not moral anymore. So I don't think the money created the evil in the person. I think the evil was there and unchecked and unchallenged.
Mm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do you think that we could have a society that a civilized modern society that wasn't necessarily based on money? Like, why do we need? What about just going back to the exchange of goods instead of having money as a store of value or a way of an exchange? Like,
I think that would be possible, but it would wreak havoc with our economy. I'll explain why.
but so sorry. Okay, go ahead.
So
This goes back to inflation.
yeah, well, inflation and money are not inseparable things. We had money before we had inflation. We just decided to introduce inflation. That's totally on us.
But if you eliminate money, then that eliminates inflation, right?
Yes, but you could eliminate inflation without eliminating money.
Okay. So what were you going to say?
So the thing about money is it's actually extremely convenient, and here's why. Let's say I know how to build houses. Okay. I've been a construction worker before. I was decent. Wasn't fantastic, but I was decent, and I did quality work. But let's say that's something I knew how to. Let's say I was a construction worker currently, which I'm not. I would have to. What do I have to trade? Construction work. What if I want something from someone who doesn't need construction work? Then how am I supposed to get it?
Okay.
I would have to trade. See, here's the thing. You can be good. You can be really good at one thing, make a lot of money doing it, and have all your needs provided for because your compensation is currency, with which you can trade with any person at any time in any place for anything.
Mm-hmm.
So even though you're only really good at one thing and you're specialized at that one thing, you can now provide for a family, yourself, and buy whatever it is you need to buy. And you can take advantage of anyone else's specialization. You remove currency, you remove the convenience of trade. And when the convenience declines, so too does your ability to remain specialized. As a society, our ability to specialize and excel at any given thing would decline. We would suffer because of it. Sure, we could live well and we could live happy, but there would be nothing you or I would be expert at in. We would be okay at a few varied things that we would need to survive, and then there would be one or two things that we might be able to do that other people might want that we could possibly trade, be it food or services. Another thing that would be difficult, that would hamper trade, is that when you have currency, you state the currency that you want in exchange for what it is that you offer. But when there is no currency, you don't have that option because you don't know what your other party is going to be trading with. As a result, now you have to spend a lot more time negotiating. This will slow trade. So not only are you decreasing the types of products that you can trade in because no one's specialized anymore, but now you're spending even more time negotiating over each individual trade. It would make online trade more difficult as well.
Wow.
There's also the fact that if you don't have currency, many of the forms of currency people would be using in exchange of goods, say food, food often spoils. When you transfer trade into currency, it can sit in a bank account for 10 years, and then you can give it to someone else, and you can still trade with it. Now, don't get me wrong, inflation's kind of killing that, but it still functions as a concept. Far more than a week or two of ripe bananas.
So, since we're on currency, what do you think of cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin? Do you think there's a place for that?
I think it's fantastic, and I would like to see more of it. Provided we can get more and more stable cryptocurrencies, I think it would be good for us. I think it's very good that we have a form of currency that the government does not control, because we've seen that when they have control over something, they have control over its production, and when they have control over its production, they can inflate it, which makes it worthless. The American dream, traditionally, was to be able to build something with your own two hands and that it would be yours. There's nothing wrong with that. You're not cheating anyone. You're not robbing anyone. You made it yourself and now it's yours. What's wrong with that? Nothing. And in turn, your rights to that property would be protected. No one would have the right to steal it from you. There was a flat sales tax which only took place when you exchanged or traded something. But all that changed when we brought in income tax, because once you have income tax, at that point, what you made, what you built, what you had created with your own two hands, now it's being taken from you. It's not yours anymore. It's not just I decided to trade this and now there's a charge associated with each transaction. No, it's on top of that, we're just going to take a part of whatever it is you produce. We're going to steal it from you, and then we're going to say we're doing it for you, and if you don't pay it, you go in jail.
Hmm.
And that, as a concept, is pretty twisted. I mean, imagine for a moment that you had someone named, what's the name of that guy? The one that's always, the one with the hat that's pointing at you. Why can't I remember his name?
Uncle Sam?
Uncle Sam, thank you.
Okay.
Imagine you had a man by the name of Uncle Sam living in your basement, okay? And Uncle Sam has decided he's going to live in your basement, and he will be there rent-free. And Uncle Sam has decided that he's going to live in your basement rent-free, and he's going to print money that he's going to force everybody else to use. By printing this money, he decreases its value, effectively stealing from everyone. But he forces them to use it anyway. Uncle Sam also simultaneously has an arsenal down there. It is big and it is scary, and he tells you that it's okay because you can trust Uncle Sam, and that you don't need guns because he has them. And now let's imagine for a moment that Uncle Sam is mentally unstable, because every 2 to 4 to 6 years, depending on when elections happen to be, Uncle Sam becomes a very different person. In fact, his whole personality can radically change.
Yeah.
Does it seem good that this oh-so-trustworthy Uncle Sam forces everyone to use his currency and owns a whole bunch of guns and tells you that you shouldn't have them, but he should, and that you should inherently trust him, even though he's going to turn into a totally different person at regular intervals, guaranteed?
Yeah. Okay, so I have a question about, so, like, when the pandemic happened,
Mm-hmm.
something had to be done, right? We needed to print money in order because people were
Mhm.
forced to stay at home, and
That's where the majority of this inflation we're experiencing now is coming from, yeah.
so you have to print money in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so given that, but the other thing is that money is also printed money when you don't have, I mean, money is also printed when you don't have an emergency, for like when it comes to like earmarks or pork or like, so everyone's struggling to, you know, get the funding for their district or whatever. So the question is, what is causing, because I mean, in an unprecedented situation like that with the pandemic,
It wasn't unprecedented.
well, in the modern economy that we live in, it was unprecedented.
Yeah, a global economy that allowed for super spreading, yeah. Yeah, you're right.
So that's the thing, like that's when it becomes arbitrary and you don't really know what the right number is. And but then in many instances, even if it's not an emergency, you won't really know what the right number is. And so this question actually isn't linked to that, but population growth.
Mm-hmm.
My brother and many economists think that to have more babies is better for the economy because it stimulates spending.
Yeah.
It'll stimulate the economy, but many people are having kids that aren't economically sustainable enough to have kids, but they're having kids anyway. But they're being encouraged to have kids. Like even in China, they're creating policies to encourage, like, we'll give you free daycare, we'll give you tax breaks on diapers or whatever. But I feel like at the individual level, not having kids is a good thing. Or a good thing in that, in terms of economics. But then on the broad scale, like, you need people to continue spending in order to keep the economy going. But why couldn't you just not have to have people continue to spend and just give money to people to spend in order to keep businesses going?
No, the policy of giving people to money so that they can spend it doesn't work. We saw that during the pandemic. It was less than a year of that, and we still are experiencing the fallout of the mass spending and the inflation. It's not sustainable. It doesn't work.
Okay, so what do you think about population growth? Like in Japan, they're having issues with, I mean, they say it's because the reason their economy's not doing well is because of the aging population.
Mhm.
So if,
Are you asking me if it's a problem or a good thing or a bad thing? I'm not sure what your question is.
so my question is, can it get to the point where you're not having enough kids? Because I actually disagree with that. I feel like the market would just fix itself in that
I agree.
scenario.
I believe it would fix itself. If we had birth for death on the regular and there was no population growth, I do believe that the market would fix itself over time. There would be certain businesses that would downsize or cease to exist, and during that time, there would be economic instability because of the fact that any time you have a business that fails, everything and everyone financially connected to it is directly impacted. They call that a recession. It's what it does.
So they say that one of the reasons, well, having an age, if you're not having kids, it means your population is aging.
Mm-hmm.
So when the population is aging, the productivity of your workforce goes down.
No, kids are expensive.
Okay.
And you have to buy all kinds of products to rear and support children, among food, products, diapers, you name it. Point is, kids are very expensive. So if you're spending money on your kids, money's leaving your house, it's going to companies, it's being used, it's being moved by companies, which are essentially money pumps. And the way that they pump money is by solving problems. The problem is that your kid needs diapers. The problem is your kid needs food. The problem is your kid needs something. You pay to have that problem solved. And as a result, the economy moves money around. And everybody just keeps solving everybody's problems. But no. If the death to birth ratio were identical, and there's really no way to do that, but let's say it was, eventually things would adjust. I think that at first there would be some economic downturn, but after a while it would balance out. Simply because of the fact that the businesses that weren't bringing in enough would fail, and then when they fail, their competitors would pick up the demand that's left over, and eventually you'd have fewer companies, fewer places to work, fewer jobs, but fewer people who need them.
Mm-hmm.
In the end, it would work out. But yeah, whenever people are having kids, that's expensive. Anytime people are spending a lot of money on something, it's going to stimulate the economy. If you look at Elon Musk, for example, richest man in the world, what did he sell? Electric cars. Well, was everyone buying electric cars? No, but he still ended up being the richest man in the world because the problems he was solving were expensive ones.
Valuable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's say let's say someone has a problem, and you can solve that problem, and the value of solving that problem will impact them to the tune of, let's say, $10 million. You solve that, it might be reasonable for them to compensate you for $10 million, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if it's an essential problem, yes. If it's not essential, then maybe they'll just eat the 10 million. Or maybe they'll settle for 8. They're willing to pay 8 for it, and then you're willing to take the 8. So really, it's what is the value of the problem? How difficult is it to solve? And then how easily can you replace the person who's capable of solving it? That's what's going to determine it. See, if you have a $10 million problem, and there's 10 people involved in the process of fixing that problem, that's $1 million apiece. But it's obviously not going to be split up that way because their skill sets vary in how easily you can replace them. So you get you get people with your higher skill sets. For example, people think CEOs don't earn much money, but or should I say, don't deserve the money they get. Now, I'm sure you're familiar with the fact that bottled water is a huge market, right? has been for like 20 years now, I think. That could be a totally wrong number. I don't know. Anyway, the point is that it's been around for a long time. Well, the thing is that a small thing can make a huge impact if it's repeated 100,000 times. So if you're in a bottling plant and you were the guy who figured out that, hey, you know what? I just realized if we reduce the threading on that bottle cap so that it's not this big, but that big, and then decrease the size of that bottle cap, the amount we can save on bottles will literally make us millions, which we can use to produce more product, outpace our competitors by producing the same product for less money, and then we can expand while they have to decrease their service areas.
Okay.
So one CEO figures that out, and now they're outdoing their competition and making a ton of money. Is he worth the $1 million? Probably. And so when you figure out how to do something like that your competitors haven't figured out, now you become extremely valuable to that company because you just solved the problem. Their competition. That's a big problem. See, it's not just about the $1 million. It's not just about the $10 million that you saved. It's about the $10 million that you can use to either expand or lower your prices. And if you lower your prices, that hurts your competitors. So now it's not just, oh, we found a way to do things a little cheaper. It's we've outdone our competitors, and now they're hurting, we are doing well, and we have an advantage in almost every area of business that we can leverage. So is that CEO worth it? Yeah, when you consider he could go somewhere else.
Well, it sounds like you have all this figured out.
No, not even close.
And
I just think a lot.
Do you invest?
I don't. I don't invest much simply because of the fact that I feel that I need to study the various companies a lot before I did something like that, and I honestly don't know where the best place to put my money would be. Right now, no, I couldn't even say food.
Because it's always changing, right? In real time, everything's always changing.
Yeah, and you could invest in a soup can company or something like that that's producing a product, but the reality is that their stocks could plummet if suddenly they can't get a hold of certain ingredients, and we're having supply chain shortages, so even food isn't a safe bet.
When we had that conversation the other day, you were saying that, well, I made the argument that spending may have been okay if the supply chain hadn't been disrupted and the war in Ukraine hadn't happened, then we would have been in a much better position, right? And there was no way to predict that. And so now everyone is saying, oh, well, see, we told you, like, you're not supposed to print money, inflation's going to happen.
Well,
but
the thing about the spending due to COVID is that the spending was there to justify shutting down the economy. And there doesn't really seem to be evidence that shutting down the economy stopped COVID. Did you catch COVID?
I may have.
I did.
Okay.
And I was vaccinated.
You got COVID while you were vaccinated?
Yes.
Was it bad or?
It was a headache, sore throat, achy shoulders and neck. And my energy was a little bit low.
But you said,
it was annoying. I'll say that.
But it seemed like there were some good things that happened with that spending too, but like housing assistance and the PPP Paycheck Protection Program, putting money in people's pockets. But that you're saying that led to the Great Resignation, right? That people stopped trying to find jobs because they had a nice cushion. But my whole thing is that, like, inflation is not really keeping up with wages.
No, it's not.
Or wages aren't keeping up with inflation.
It's superseding wages by far.
Yeah. So that's why people are like, why should I go back to work if my money is just going to disappear?
Like, why do I want to work 8 hours a day when I get compensated isn't worth my time?
Yeah.
No, my point is this. There were a lot of mistakes made, and I think the biggest one was the shutdown in the first place. What we should have done was we should have been creating a shutdown for those who were at risk, not those who were not. The elderly, I think the assistance should have been going to them specifically, and then they should have stayed home while they worked on the vaccine. Once the vaccine was created, then they should have been giving it to the elderly first. And then once the elderly had it, then they should give it to everybody else if they want it. They should have been imposing it and forcing it on no one, but here's the reality that's a little bit disturbing. COVID is a virus. I had I'll use her first name since people don't know her last name. It doesn't matter. I had a supervisor at the name. Her name was Lakendria. I really liked her.
Lakendria?
Lakendria.
That's a cool name. Never heard that name.
Yeah, she was pretty awesome. I remember before COVID hit the United States, she made the statement, "I hope it doesn't come here." And I said, "It will. And there's nothing they can do to stop it. And then it'll become the new flu." And she looked at me like I was crazy. And then I said, "It's a virus, and viruses have a high tendency toward mutation. And every person a virus is in is a chance for that virus to mutate. This one's highly contagious, which means more people will have it, more chances for mutation. And because it's highly contagious, no one has successfully been able to quarantine it, which means it will come here because of trade. It is unavoidable. You cannot stop it. It will get here one way or another. It will happen, and when it gets here, and this was back when they were projecting numbers like 2.6% death rate, which proved to be completely off. Thank goodness for that.
The real death rate ended up being like 1%, right? Or
Far
less.
below 1%,
Oh.
yeah. So they were multiplying the death rate by like 20, which those are some pretty interesting numbers to make mistakes on. I can understand why people were worried, but realistically, humanity hasn't hidden from illnesses before, and there's nothing to indicate that it worked. You also have to realize that if no one can quarantine that sucker, then the real question comes, if a quarantine, I mean, let's think about what is a quarantine?
It's basically a shutdown. You're forced to go somewhere and be secluded to avoid infection.
Nothing in or out. That's the idea.
Right.
You don't want any transfer of the illness in and out. It must stay contained. We're talking like plastic walls, filtered air, all that fun stuff. We tried that, and we couldn't keep it contained. And now you're telling me that people who are supposed to stay at home most of the day and then
Right.
go to the store to get food somehow is going to be effective? The only thing you've guaranteed is that when one person in that house catches it, they're going to spread it to all the others because they're staying there. It's the only
Yeah.
thing you guaranteed.
Yeah.
And there's no evidence that shows quarantines actually decreased infection rates.
Okay.
So the quarantine is the
Oh, really?
justification.
I didn't know.
The quarantine is the justification for the shutdown and the spending. When you found out it wasn't working after the first 2-3 weeks, why did you continue?
So you think it was a conspiracy to print more
I'm
money,
just
or-
saying it
okay.
was stupid.
Okay.
Conspiracy or not, it was dumb. When you found out it wasn't working, why would you continue to pour out money? And the only reason I can come up with that makes any kind of sense, regardless of one's political persuasion, is that people were scared due to the news.
Mm-hmm. You should run for office. My gosh.
I think the news has done a massive disservice to this country. They have done so much harm, it's disgusting. And they're not held responsible because freedom of the press. Well, how about you stop lying to people to terrify them so that you can get ratings? I remember the George Floyd riots when it happened, before they happened. And I remember watching CNN, and I remember watching Anderson Cooper as he sat there and he used the words black and white right next to each other. The way he said it with such anger and hostility, making them sound like opposing groups.
Black and white.
He
referring to
wanted
race?
them to fight.
Oh.
He wanted
Yeah.
violence. He
Yeah.
wanted news coverage.
Right.
He wanted ratings.
That's the only reason Donald Trump is still relevant, you think? because of the media. The media is salivating to get Trump back because their ratings are
Well,
plummeting.
they've suffered without him. I mean, under him they grew a lot, and then when he left, they suffered greatly because, well, now he can't even get on Twitter.
That could be an advantage for him too, right?
How?
Just because he's gone now, but then at some point he will be back, right? And like whenever, like for instance, say if there's a girl that you like, or
Mhm.
if there's anyone that you like,
Mm-hmm.
or anything that you like, and you can't have it,
Mm-hmm.
you want it more, right?
You know, there's a saying, absence makes the heart grow fonder, but I've always felt that was towards someone else.
Yeah. So, well, I guess we'll see, but
All I know is that people are easily distracted. We've been exploited in that way many times, and the news makes good use of that. I often feel like people who watch the news sadly have very short attention spans because they're shown one thing 1 minute and then a week later they're shown something totally different, and they totally forget what they saw a week earlier. It's like it's like watching a play without seeing the beginning or the end. You just watch some point in the middle. Like at the end, let's say you're watching a play and you see somebody stab and kill somebody else. Like, oh, that was terrible. No, he just killed the villain. What do you mean? Without context, everything loses its meaning. And that's the game that the media plays. They tamper with context constantly. It's not a service. Their goal is not to make you informed so that you can vote intelligently. That is not their aim in the slightest.
speaking of the media, the guns, you on the phone the other day, you said that you had an answer for guns.
Yes, gun control. So there's a lot of ways that one can look at it, and all of them invariably come back to we need the guns, and I'll explain why. There's a massive power disparity between our government and us. Do you? I'm not going to. Let's say I'm not going to ask you if you have a gun. That may be too personal.
I don't have a gun.
Okay.
I've
alright.
never owned a gun.
Okay.
I grew up in a culture that wasn't a big fan of guns, but every Thanksgiving, my great uncle, he was a hunter and big fan of guns, so we would go skeet shooting.
I have a brother-in-law that's a professional hunter, but he's bow hunting, not gun.
Oh,
Interestingly enough.
takes
It
a lot
is.
more skill being a bow hunter than a gun hunter.
I wish I could say I know, but I don't.
Okay, so you don't own a gun?
I own two.
Do you own like a semi-automatic?
You mean if I pull the trigger, one bullet comes out? Yes.
No, you pull the trigger. I'm talking about bump stocks and magazines and all that. Do you have one of those?
Technically, a semi-automatic is you pull the trigger once and one bullet comes out.
So what's the difference between a semi-automatic and a normal gun?
There isn't. They're trying to ban them all.
Okay.
Yeah.
But if you add,
They're just playing with
but
words.
you can add stuff to it, right, to make it fire in rounds quicker than a normal gun, right?
If you wanted to destroy your firearm, I suppose. The game is the gun is designed
Okay,
to
so
operate. a certain way.
you're for unlimited freedom with guns, like bump stocks, magazines, unlimited magazines.
I
Like,
think
are we talking machine guns here? Like, bring out the bazookas.
if everybody has a machine gun, then is it bad that everybody has a machine gun?
I think it's bad because not everyone is mentally stable.
That's fair. So if we take the guns away from the people who are mentally unstable,
Okay. So you're for more mental health.
Oh, yeah.
You're like, it's not the
there needs to
it's-
be more accountability where mental health is concerned, not less.
It's not the gun that kills, it's the person.
There are lots of ways to knock people off, and in countries where they don't have guns, you see plenty of it. But yeah. I
So what's
remember-
your solution to these mass shootings?
Well, first of all, I don't think the greatest threat to the American people is the American people. I think it's the government. And that's not because I hate government. It's because it is just a matter of if you exist in a representative democracy, sooner or later there will be someone in charge who has ill intent. That is guaranteed. Wherever there is power, you will find those who seek it. It's been 200 years.
Okay, but I'm talking about the mass shootings, though. How do we eradicate that?
You can't.
Okay.
There's no way to do it. You have to realize that when you disarm the general public, something happens.
So you have to change the culture.
Yes.
I mean, why
There-
are these
there has to
people
be
going
more,
into kindergarten classrooms?
There needs to be more
So
personal
what do you think about the
accountability.
American culture?
Oh, it's definitely getting worse.
But
They've
what?
they've
Yeah.
proven that people who are born and raised in a home that does not have a father are far more statistically likely to commit violent crime and or end up in prison. And for a long time, society has pushed that
What's causing the breakup of the family?
convenience. The government never should have become involved in marriage, ever. I think the only involvement they should have is age restrictions. Like, 40-year-old man should not be dating or marrying some 12-year-old girl. That's horrifying. But where adults are concerned, anyone should be able to marry anyone, and the government shouldn't be involved in it in any way beyond that. The fact that the government did get involved, so just as a concept, let's say, are you familiar with red pill content at all?
Red pill content?
Yeah.
No.
Okay. Okay, well, here's some basic concepts in it. So, basically, it explains a lot of why culture is moving the way it is, why marriage is falling apart, why people are choosing not to get married, things of that nature. Let's say I got married tomorrow, and then let's say she divorces me the day after. According to the law, she gets half of everything I own, right?
Yeah, if you don't have a prenuptial
Yeah,
agreement.
yeah. And those are pretty easy to bypass. She can just claim that she signed it under duress,
Okay.
which works if she claimed that I was abusive as well, which is difficult for me to disprove. The assumption today, outside of Johnny Depp, is that if you are accused of these things, that you are just guilty by default. Women are worried about men who do things to them physically, but those men have to be physically present with those women to do those things. Whereas women, on the other hand, they can accuse you of something with no proof. They don't have to have ever dated you. They don't even have to know. They don't even have to have ever come within 50 miles of you. Their window of opportunity consists of when they become aware of your existence. That's terrifying. They can take away your ability to earn, your ability to get a job, your ability to support a family, your ability to find another woman that you're actually happy with.
What I don't understand is why are you're speaking like a hardcore Republican.
Mm-hmm.
Why are you an independent?
Because Republicans don't follow through on anything they believe. And I don't think that, and I didn't explain why I'm so pro 2A, and it's pretty simple. In Russia and Germany, and as well as other countries, when the government disarms the public, within 5 years, they take their other rights. And when that occurs, usually the government kills off a massive portion of the population. I am not saying that lives lost by gun violence don't matter. I am saying that the gun violence would come from the government if we took the guns away from the people.
So you're saying Republicans are somewhat pro-government, pro-regulation around many things that you are anti-regulation.
I'm saying, to answer first why I'm pro-gun, it's this. If you take guns away from the people, it's the government using guns on the people. And when that happens, the death toll isn't a high school here and there. It's like a third of your population. It's mass death.
Okay. At some point, it's going to be that way, right?
Usually 5 years, statistically, is what happens. 5 years. Almost without exception, as far as the world stage is concerned. 5 years.
So you never really explained why you're an independent and not a...
I am an independent because I feel that the Republican Party does a lot of things that I don't agree with. A lot of the time, they do stupid things. For example, George Bush, during the war in Iraq, he decided to vaccinate soldiers for smallpox because he was afraid that smallpox would be weaponized against them. Makes sense, right?
Mhm.
But the preliminary figures that they provided for that were that that the vaccine would result in 1 in 10 people would actually catch it, and 1 in 4 would die. That means 1 out of every 40 servicemen would end up dead.
What you're saying with the vaccine?
No,
Or with
the
that?
vaccine would do it.
To them.
Yes. And when I heard those figures, I'm like, you better not be vaccinating them. That's insane. Well, it turns out the figures weren't as bad as they initially thought they were. But if that's what you thought the figures were, why on earth would you consider it when you don't even know if they have the weapon?
Okay, so too much regulation, kind of.
It's not an issue of too much or too little regulation. It's just a stupid move. I've seen Republicans do stupid thing after stupid thing after stupid thing that I can't agree with.
What do you like about Democrats?
They're really good at pointing out problems. I honestly feel like Democrats point out problems and Republicans don't really solve them, but they don't really create them either. I think that we need a balance of the two. I don't agree with a lot of Democratic positions, but at the same time, I can't deny that a good balance of them tends to produce a healthy economy. It tends to produce more balanced education systems. It tends to produce more balanced everything, but you have to have a balance. And this whole thing where neither side will work with the other isn't serving anybody, because all that does is create a greater sense of tribalism, which results in even more people just stupidly sticking together over things that, like, if there's a
Yeah, I get it.
have you ever had a
Because people like to feel like they're a part of something bigger than themselves, like community, right? So they, like with groupthink,
Mhm.
people will just blindly follow
groupthink is
the
the opposite
group
of
because
think.
they want to be a part of the group. They know that if they go against what the group is saying, that there's a risk that they will be thrown out of the group. So people want a feeling of acceptance.
I
So-
don't think it's even a feeling
Okay.
of acceptance, because most of the time when it comes to groupthink, most people aren't getting their own opinions really heard. So what ends up happening is it's more along the lines of, well, I'll get something rather than nothing. I don't want to get nothing. But we wouldn't be getting nothing if we weren't so divided in the first place. It wouldn't be a win-lose. It would be a, let's find a way to make this thing work. Like, for example, my main concern is that I don't trust the government because I don't trust politics. I mean, do you trust politicians?
I don't trust anyone.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Like, if you walked up to a group of people and then you asked them one at a time if they trust politicians, they'd be like, no. If you asked them as a group, raise your hand if you trust politicians, they wouldn't be raising their hands. And yet, the politicians control the military, and the military has the guns. So why would you trust that situation? You have to realize that every single election is a functional war that decides how we're governed, but it's done without bloodshed. And it's always decided by the majority. When the one that's outnumbered loses, just like in real warfare. And we do it in substitute of an actual war. And that's what people don't realize. So nobody has to go use their guns and shoot anybody else, because the fact is we already had the dispute. We already fought the war. We did it with words, we did it with opinions. A non-violent battlefield, which is why this speech is violence crap is so damaging. Because when you decide that speech is violence, you have closed the only battlefield that doesn't require bloodshed. So now you can't resolve your problems until they get so big that it results in bloodshed. Who thought that was a good idea? I mean, that crap, if it's not countered, is going to kill people. It's going to. It will. The point is that if you look at the overlap, let's say a 60 or 70% majority establishes the law, okay? And then if you get 60, let's say you get 70% against 30%. If those two were to fight, what would happen? The 30% would get wiped out, they would be forced to surrender, or they would die. So why fight that war? You vote, now it's done, right? The government shouldn't worry. In a representative democracy, government should never worry about the people overthrowing the government, because the war is already happening in the form of voting. The only time that becomes a possibility is when the government ceases to be a representative democracy by refusing to represent its people. And when that happens, your elections aren't functioning anymore. So as long as your elections are functioning, there is no need for war. And if your elections aren't functioning, then at that point
that's the situation we're in now, though, right? So a lot of people would say that our politicians aren't really representing us primarily. They're representing big money interests.
And they lie about what they're going to do when they get into office. Yeah.
So, but what you're saying, though, that if that is the case, then it produces real war, right?
It could. But my point here is, when
but
that
people
is
are gullible and they don't.
Yeah.
And they are not paying attention. They don't really. As long as
Yes.
they're like getting fed, they have shelter, they have the basics. They've got their smartphone. They've got the. Yeah.
My
the
point
media
is so insurrection is not a thing that would ever happen with an armed nation if you're actually living in a representative democracy, simply because of the fact that the majority could always overthrow the minority, and because the democracy itself should reflect the population itself. And if it doesn't, they're doing it wrong. In other words, when politicians claim something like insurrection or betrayal or something like that, or this is treason, when they are refusing to represent the democracy, what's actually happening is the politicians are the ones betraying the democracy and the country, not the people. It's a government by the people, for the people. That's the way it's supposed to work. When they violate that, they create the conditions that are problematic. So my point is...
Do you think that for, by, and of the people, but it's not for, by, and of the people now because people just aren't really engaged?
Yes.
And so...
Yes, one of the biggest problems we have...
But do you think that if it did turn into for, by, and of the people, like if everyone did start paying attention, do you think leaders would actually listen, or do you think they would keep just listening to big money interests and get away with it? They'll say one thing and do another. They'll talk in rhetoric.
They would have to. The problem is that the general public does not take the responsibility of being informed seriously before they vote. And that is what's causing the majority of the problem, because it puts politicians in a position where they can lie, get elected, lie some more, stay in office. Because if people paid attention, they'd be like, that one lied to me, get him out.
Yeah.
It's like, I want a Democrat, fine. We'll pick a different Democrat to run for our party. And they would be able to do that. But that doesn't happen. People don't realize that more than half the power of their vote has been stolen. And the way that it has been stolen is because of the fact that politicians lie about what they're going to do before they get into office. You no longer have the power to vote for someone who represents your interests. You only have the power to remove someone who doesn't. It used to be that you would have, when we had honest politicians who were honest about what they wanted to do when they were in office, we had the power to elect someone who represented our interests and remove those we don't. Now we can only remove people we don't, and that only works for the people who pay attention. And they don't. They vote based on feelings. They look at a ballot and they're like, I feel like this person could do a good job, and they just fill it in, or they just fill in the Republican bubble or the Democrat bubble. And they know nothing about the person they're actually voting for. Anyone can run as a Republican. Anyone can run as a Democrat. You have no idea who that person is.
Do you so the way the system is set up now, unless you're like unless you are meeting the needs of the inner circle of the party, then you have no chance of getting elected.
That's very true with Democrats because they have joint funding. Whenever one Democrat receives funding, it's actually they actually have shared funding for the whole party. So if you run for the Senate or Congress as a Democrat, you receive Democrat Party funding to help you with your campaign. The same isn't true with the Republican Party. As a result, that's why the Democrats are so unified, which actually does us a disservice. And the reason they're so unified is because if you defy the party and you don't toe the line and do what the party tells you to do, you won't get your funding. They can pull that, and then you have no chance of being
within
reelected.
the Republican Party, you have the freedom to.
They have to produce their own funding. Yeah, they have to do their own fundraising. They don't really have a Republican mutual fund for running for office, so to speak. And I think something like that, frankly, shouldn't exist with either party. I think it would make both parties a great deal more honest to make sure that there is no functional mutual fund between parties. I think that does them all a disservice. I mean, I'm sure you have good ideas. I'm sure the people sitting over there probably have some good ideas, but we're never going to hear them. And they'll never be on the national stage. It'll never get there because it's not one of the main ideas that are being pushed. And that's actually one of the things that's doing us a massive disservice. That a representative democracy is failing simply because of the fact that well, actually, there's a lot of factors, but one of the main factors is that the ideas of the people don't reach there because they're forced to be unified in order to be heard at all.
Do you think another form of governing could be better than democracy?
I think,
for instance, like with China, they consider themselves to be socialist with Chinese characteristics, along with a sprinkle of capitalism. The thing is that like China does a good job of breaking up monopoly companies before they get too big.
That's because they don't want the companies to be a threat to the government,
Right.
not because they care about the people.
Okay.
On the flip side here, we have the
What
government
about
working with
Scandinavia,
those companies.
which is they consider themselves to be democratic socialist with a sprinkle of capitalism.
I would honestly, I think that democracy is the best move, but it only works if people are honest. There is no substitute for a dishonest people. You can't compensate for it. No dishonest people are capable of self-governance. They're just not. They will eventually sabotage whatever system you give them, whatever checks and balances you create, they will always bypass. If you want to know who's violating your rights, if you want to know who your real enemies are, look at those who are supporting, installing, and enforcing double standards in a democracy. Wherever double standards reside, democracy dies. That's how you identify them.
So when you say double standards, saying one thing and doing another,
No,
or
no.
What do you mean by that?
A democracy works because it has a fair voting and rule system. A double standard is where you no longer operate on the premise of fairness. For example, changing voting laws so that it'll favor a certain group, for example. That would be sacrificing your democracy and corrupting your election process and making it questionable whether or not the people are actually being represented, and sacrificing democracy itself by imbalancing it with unfair practices. They're not equal across the board. And you did all that with a double standard. Just one.
What do you think about Aurora? Is there anything you would change about Aurora? If you were to testify in front of the city council, what would you say? How long have you lived in Aurora?
Most of my life.
Okay.
I mean,
so
I've lived in Denver
obviously
too.
You like
but
Aurora since you stayed here. And
yeah, I do like it. It's a nice place. I hate the winter though. Not fond of the winter here.
neither am I.
But this is nice.
Yeah. I think we're pretty lucky to be in Colorado in general.
Yeah. I really like the mountains. I tried going to Utah a little while back. It's for my grandfather's funeral, and you can only look at that scenery for so long. Just so boring and flat. You're like, okay, now it's red. Yay.
Yeah. Yeah.
A change happened.
Vacation land. We didn't really go into Christianity that much. I want to learn more about it.
Ask away.
Can you can you preach to us, or?
I'm not a preacher.
I mean, you've been preaching this whole time. I haven't had to do anything. It's been great.
Okay, I'd say the basic beliefs of the Church of Jesus Christ are basically like this. First of all, we do believe that Christ is our Savior, hence his name in the religion itself. But it's going to sound weird. Rather than just stating our beliefs, I'm going to state beliefs from other religions along with it, just so that it makes a little more sense, the context. We believe that we are the literal children of God. And there are a lot of people who might think that's presumptuous and prideful, but if you look at the Old Testament or the New Testament in the Bible, and based on the Dead Sea Scrolls, historical references, it seems extremely likely that it is a historical record, not just a written book because somebody decided to make it. If you look at that, you see evidence that God is powerful. God exists, and God has said that he cannot lie. So if God cannot lie, he exists and he is powerful, and he has referred to us as his children more times than we can count. What are we? Probably his children. And a lot of people say, oh, we're his children because he created us. No. No. All this was created too. Does he refer to that tree as his child? No. He does not. Why? I mean, first of all, for starters, the tree's not sanctioned, but my point is that does he refer to birds, animals as his children? Just us. Why? And if we're not his children, then why would he refer to us as such? As a being who is both powerful, infallible, and incapable of lying.
Because we're part of him? We're an extension of him?
No. It's more simple than that. We're actually just his children. Birds reproduce as birds. Trees reproduce trees. So if a God claims that we are his children, what does that say about our potential? That it is the same as his. But what is God? We know that he is infallible. We know that he is powerful. We know that he does not and cannot sin. And it's interesting that a being who has that potential and does not sin wishes for us to be like him, gives us commandments telling us not to sin, because perhaps the path to becoming what we can lies in developing the same tendencies he has. It would be rational after all. Imagine if we had a God without perfect self-control. How well off do you think we would currently be?
You think our God is perfectly self-controlled?
I do.
How come we aren't, if he is?
Well, does a baby bird learn to fly the moment it hatches? It has to grow. It has to develop the necessary parts. It has to become stronger. It has to train itself, and then it can do what comes naturally to it. But maybe it's not as easy as we think it is. Maybe it's not all that natural. Maybe there are more that fail than succeed. Maybe there are many paths that don't lead toward what he is, and few that do. And maybe he tells us how to use that path so we can get there, and maybe we just keep thinking we know better. Anyway, to the actual religion rather than just my opinions. We believe that we are literally his children. He is the father of our spirits. This does imply that we do have a mother who is, yes, his equal. We do not have her name. Look at what we've done with his, how we've desecrated it, disrespected it, and you can understand why maybe he wouldn't want us to violate her name as well. Now, but yes, we have a heavenly Father. We have a heavenly Mother. And Christ is quite literally our oldest brother. More time to grow into what he's supposed to be, as it were. We all existed for an eternity before we ever came here. Our spirits are, in fact, quite old. And we developed as much as we could without physical bodies. Our Heavenly Father has a physical body and a spiritual body. And that is part of what makes him what he is. For the next stage of our growth, we needed to become more like him. And we just didn't have the equipment for it yet. So, the goal was that we were to come here, obtain physical bodies, and become more like our Heavenly Father. But there was a problem. The problem is that Heavenly Father is God. He is not just simply some being who has to do the right thing. He is someone who always chooses to do the right thing. And that's a problem. If we're going to become like him, it has to be a choice. It has to be something we pick. Imagine a being with all power, but the tendency to turn truths into untruths. How much damage do you think that could do? Imagine someone with all power who is predisposed toward cruelty, needlessly. It's a horrifying thought. The greater the power you have, the more self-control you would require. So if you are going to teach and train someone to become that, would you train anyone who has the wrong disposition? Would you teach anyone who has the wrong disposition, knowing what the consequences would be? If you were a responsible, divine being, a God, with the foresight to know what happens when you give a person who lacks self-control enormous power. I don't even have to be a God to know how that ends. We are here to decide for ourselves our own disposition, good or evil, kind or violent. We will choose it for ourselves. And based on what we pick, we will choose what we become, whether it is like him or not. Now, we were told that to become like him, we needed physical bodies, and that meant we had to come here. We needed to live, we needed to die, and then our spirits and our bodies would be reunited. And there were those, one in particular, who had a different plan, and that was Satan. He said, now if our religion believes that the work and glory of God is the eternal life and salvation of mankind. It is a work and effort he is constantly invested in. In other words, everything he does is to serve and better us, just like a good father would. Now, his work and his glory is the eternal life and salvation of mankind. That's important. Because when Satan said we should all come back, he was offering to commandeer the eternal life and salvation of mankind to his own credit, functionally making himself the glorified being, also known as God. But he would do it without the hard work. He would do it without the right disposition. And the only way his plan would function is if none of us had a choice what we did. We would all lose the power to choose for ourselves. We would all lose our free agency and be forced to obey, to never sin. And it would guarantee we would all get back home. But when we got home, we would have learned none of the lessons we needed. We would have done none of the growing that was essential. And we would not have the freedom necessary to even be a God. Our potential, that divine potential, would no longer exist. So he would be glorified, and we would be damned forever. And by damned, I mean our progression would be forever halted. So, naturally, that was not the plan that won out, but there was a war in heaven. Now, there are those that dispute whether or not it was a physical war, but I don't believe that anyone would have gone peacefully knowing the consequences of losing. So I believe that it was not an argument. 1/3 of the hosts of heaven lost that war, and they were cast out. Those are our brothers and sisters. Satan was among them. His name was Lucifer, son of the morning. A beautiful name, if you think about it. It says something about the potential that each and every one of us has, and the high hopes that are had for us that we may or may not choose to live up to. So now we are here, and our goal is to get back home. And that means that we will sin, we will make mistakes, and we will have need of an atonement, a price that will be paid for those sins. And no matter what we do, no matter what we try, we cannot remove the damage that those sins has done to our soul. We cannot undo it. That is not within our power. That's why we need a Savior. So let's say I'm a not nice person and I'm really rude to people in general. I should probably work on that realistically. But let's just say
You should be a priest. Or, gosh, you should be mayor of Aurora.
Realistically, let's just say that I should be nicer to people and I'm not. And let's say that's something.
Well, how come you're not? If you go to church if you're really religious and you're saying all these things,
Because
why don't you practice it? Practice what you preach.
I practice all kinds of things, but I can't do them all at once. And as I said before, I'm a strong believer in blunt truth. It's a strength and a weakness, and I haven't decided which is greater. But let's just say that I was needlessly rude to people, that I was just a jerk. I'm not, but let's just say I was. And then let's say that I changed, became a better person, and I left that behind. And I decided to be a good person who treats people kind. Any situation that comes up, I find a way to be kind to somebody. I'm good, right?
Yeah.
No.
You may not be as happy though.
No,
Okay, go ahead.
because the sin is still there. I can't remove it. I can remove all those tendencies, but I can't remove the sin, and that's where the Savior comes in. Now that I've no longer chosen to be that thing, He can remove it from me. But He will not redeem me against my own choice. He will not force redemption on me. I have to choose it. Everything has to be by choice.
Free will.
Mm-hmm. Because as I said before, the goal and destination is to become as God the Father is.
But you're saying once you've sinned,
Mm-hmm.
that will scar you forever,
It's there forever until the Savior removes it, yes.
and you don't know when that will be. It could be in another lifetime. It could be.
Oh my goodness, no. That can happen very quickly. But genuinely, it's not going to happen until after genuine change occurs. Generally, you're going to have to change first. As long as you hold on to... Think of it like a ball and chain. He has the keys to remove it. But if you carry it in your hand, it's done you no good.
So you have to make the choice.
You do.
But where does that...
You pray.
It seems to me that
You pray and ask for forgiveness. That's it. All miracles are predicated upon faith, so there is a certain amount of belief required for the atonement to do its work. And it can do a great deal more than people realize. It's not just a tool for removing sins, it does other things as well. It can remove pain, sorrow, regret, even from being a victim. Even from having been harmed or wronged by someone else, that pain can also be removed. It actually works in many different ways. It's not just an issue of removing a sin. Now, here's just my speculation. This isn't necessarily a part of our religion. This is just my speculation. I've often wondered why it is that sin is so stinking damaging. Like, why would it make such a huge freaking difference? Like, why is it that once you did the wrong thing, even if you completely change so that there's no longer in your nature, but that sin's there, how is it that you can't remove that?
is it that you can't, because it's already been done, and once something's been done, there's no way to reverse it. And once you've done something, it automatically affects everything around you in the place that you did it in, right? So usually when you commit sin,
Mhm.
it'll be affecting someone else negatively,
Potentially,
and that will
yes.
change someone else forever.
Mhm.
And you
But
don't
I'm
want,
saying,
yeah.
how does it damage you? Like, if you go and you pray and you ask for forgiveness and you've changed so you don't do those things anymore, and then you are redeemed and the sin is removed from you, that doesn't mean the things you did didn't affect some person over here. So whether you're redeemed or not, that person can still be affected, right?
Mhm.
So the question is, pertaining to you, why is it so damaging?
You've realized you've done it, or you haven't realized you've done it.
Well, you have to acknowledge that you've committed a
Okay,
sin
so
first.
if you've
But
acknowledged that you've done it, then you feel guilt, I guess.
okay, but why would
It-
why would guilt damn you forever? I'm sorry, I'm asking a very, very complicated question. I've pondered over this a long time, and the answer I'm going to give you is part church doctrine and a big chunk just me.
Okay.
The church doctrine is that in the beginning we were spiritual intelligences, made of light and truth. And I can't help but think that that light and truth is an integral part of who and what we were. It wasn't just anything that became children of God, but rather light and truth. Which begs the question, if it had to be light and truth, and it is an integral part of what we are, and it wasn't something else, but rather light and truth that were made children of God, then would it not stand to reason that that same light and truth is also part of that potential? We're taught that God the Father, that all light and truth flows unto him without compulsion. We're also taught that that he has and is all light and truth. So every truth that can be had and known, he embodies it. He is it already. So, if we were not all truth and all light, but just some truth and some light, that would mean that there were pieces we were missing, wouldn't it? But what qualified us, or rather what made it even plausible or possible to become his children in the first place, was the fact that we were and had light and truth to begin with. So, the process of sin has been outlined fairly clearly. When you have a good choice and a bad choice laid out before you, you are able to discern between the two, and you choose the one that is wrong, knowingly. That is a sin. So, that would indicate that that the sin is specific, or the damage is specific, to the light and truth currently contained within you. That which gives you your divine potential. When you violate that light and truth, you are and you choose.
So you lose a part of yourself.
You do. Part of what qualified you to be his child in the first